The heavy, unrelenting snow was a curtain that seemed to muffle the entire world, draping the upstate New York highway in a shroud of white noise. Inside the climate-controlled cabin of his imported electric SUV, James Smith, 38 years old, CEO of a successful but demanding data analytics firm, slammed his palm against the center console, the dull thud barely audible over the Indodio system. He hated December travel, he hated the snow, and most of all, he hated the feeling of being yanked away from a critical closing deal by a storm advisory. He was driving too fast for the conditions, his irritation a physical pressure behind his eyes. "Just get me home," he muttered to the windshield, which was frantically swiping away flakes the size of coins. It was his property, his secluded estate in the foothills. That each craved the quiet, the order, the complete lack of human friction. His life was built on predictable data streams and logical outcomes, and the chaos of nature always felt like a personal affront. He prided himself on control, and the blizzard mocked that perfectly curated control. He had spent the last decade building his empire in a fortress of solitude around it, determined never to be blindsided or vulnerable again. The thought of an unexpected event, a variable he hadn't accounted for, made his skin crawl. Then, through a sudden break in the swirling snow, a shape appeared on the shoulder, impossibly frail and out of place. It was a person, huddled and struggling against the gale. A slight figure that looked less like a traveler and more like a discarded piece of trash in the vast, hostile landscape. James's immediate, cynical thought was of a broken-down car or a desperate plea for money. But the raw, punishing nature of the blizzard quickly erased that judgment. No one was out here by choice. No one survived out here by choice. The temperature was dipping dangerously low, promising hypothermia within the hour. He hesitated, his foot hovering over the accelerator, ready to dismiss the sight as someone else's problem, a hallmark of his carefully constructed, insulated life. But the sheer vulnerability of the figure, shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink into the very asphalt, lodged itself beneath his armor. The imported SUV's expensive ceramic brakes whined in protest as he brought the vehicle to an abrupt, grinding halt 65 feet past the figure. He backed up slowly, the tires crunching loudly on the frozen slush. He could feel the expensive suspension of his vehicle protesting the rough shoulder, a minor annoyance that strangely anchored him to the moment. He lowered the passenger window only an inch, a sliver of glass separating his warmth from the biting, frigid air. He barked, his voice rough and devoid of compassion. He didn't want to engage, already regretting the 6 seconds he'd lost. His intention was purely transactional. Remove the anomaly, restore order, move on. The figure, a young woman, was slow to react. Her face was obscured by a hood and matted, dark hair, slick with ice. Her clothes a thin, threadbare denim jacket and torn jeans offered zero protection against the -10-degree cold. She moved with the stiff, puppet-like awkwardness of someone whose joints had begun to lock up. Her backpack, stained and oversized, slipped from her shoulder as she fumbled with the handle. When she finally managed to clamber in, she didn't sit. She collapsed onto the plush leather seat, a heap of shivering misery. She smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp, old fabric, an odor that was instantly foreign in the sterile environment of the car. "Thank you," she managed, the word a dry, rasping whisper. She pulled the door shut, the solid thunk of the expensive German engineering sealing them in. James shifted into drive. "Don't thank me. I hate driving slow. Try not to get water on the seats." His tone was deliberately flat, a defense mechanism against the wave of pity he absolutely refused to feel. He used callousness as a shield, hoping to repel any emotional debt. She flinched, her large, dark eyes lifting to meet his for the first time, eyes that held a depth of exhaustion and fear that shocked him. They were the eyes of a pursued animal, too wide, too bruised by worry, a fleeting, uncomfortable image of a past failure, a sharp business betrayal, flashed across his mind, a moment when he had felt equally exposed and helpless, but he instantly smothered it. He was a master of compartmentalization, and sentimentality was a liability. I won't be long," she stammered, wrapping her arms around her chest, trying to compress her shivering. "It doesn't matter to me," James said, accelerating back up to speed, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. "Just tell me where to drop you." "Mary Smith. I'm 24. James." The silence that followed stretched out, thin and brittle, like the ice forming on the road. James glanced over, impatiently. "Nowhere," she finally whispered, the single word hanging in the air, weighted with absolute finality. James scoffed, an angry, dismissive sound. Don't be ridiculous. A friend, a bus station, an apartment lease. You were walking on the state highway in a white... His analytical mind rejected the concept of nowhere as an illogical variable. I am specific. I have nowhere to go. If you need to stop, then stop. I'll get out. The last sentence was delivered with a sudden, unexpected flare of bitter pride, a tiny spark of resistance in her utterly defeated posture. She was reclaiming the smallest shred of agency. This defiance annoyed him, but it also stalled his impulse to leave her. James gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the heated steering wheel. He knew this road well. His estate, a sprawling, minimalist structure of glass and steel, was only another 18 minutes away. There was a separate, recently renovated carriage house used for overflow guests or contractors, complete with a self-contained kitchen, a modern boiler, and a proper stone fireplace. It was fully stocked, it was warm, it was safe. It was simply an asset, an extra piece of real estate that offered a temporary solution to the human anomaly currently disrupting his interior. Fine. You'll come with me, he decreed, the decision made with the cold efficiency of a corporate takeover. I have a guest house on the property. You can use it tonight. Get warm, eat something. In the morning, I'll give you $400 for a bus ticket to wherever you need to go. Mary didn't answer right away. She looked at him, suspicion warring with sheer, desperate relief in her eyes. The idea of a warm, safe night was an almost unbearable luxury. She eventually nodded, a jerky, uncertain movement. A night. Only a night. The rest of the drive was submerged in a heavy, awkward silence, thick enough to be suffocating. James fought the urge to check on her again, to ask what happened, who she was running from. He had trained himself over decades of cutthroat business to eliminate curiosity about things that did not directly benefit his bottom line. This girl was a distraction, an inconvenience he would neutralize with money and remove by morning. That was the plan. His property, Shieldhaven, appeared like a fortress against the white backdrop of stark, imposing vision of modern architecture. He drove past the main residence and stopped in front of the carriage house, a smaller, rustic stone structure that still managed to exude an expensive charm. A thin column of smoke was already spiraling from the chimney. The maintenance system kept the heat running low to prevent pipes from freezing. James killed the engine. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the hefty key fob for the carriage house, and tossed it under her lap. Fireplace works. Everything you need is in there. Door locks automatically. Don't try to enter the main house. Mary snatched the keys, the fear returning in a fresh surge, fueled by his cold, unyielding ultimatum. She nodded again, not trusting her voice. She quickly pushed the door open, the dome light illuminating her features. A pale, sharp jawline, and eyes already redrimmed from the cold and suppressed tears. She scrambled out into the snow, stumbling slightly before finding her footing, clutching the keys like a lifeline. She didn't look back as she hurried toward the door. Every movement was cautious, as if expecting the ground to give way beneath her. James watched her until the soft glow from the carriage house's interior windows confirmed she was inside. He sighed, the sound a mix of exhaustion and mission accomplished. He drove to the main house, entered his pristine world of calm and expensive solitude, and immediately went to his bar. He poured himself a hefty glass of a 21-year-old single malt scotch. The amber liquid burned pleasantly going down, but it failed to extinguish the nagging image of Mary's frightened, defeated eyes. He tried to focus on his work emails from Singapore, a crisis in the Berlin office, but his mind kept cycling back. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She had nowhere. He attempted to categorize the feeling as residual stress from the drive, but it didn't work. Get warm, get out by dawn. The words echoed with a cruelty he didn't like. He was a hard man, a cynical man, but not a fundamentally cruel one. Or so he told himself. He tossed back the rest of his drink. He needed to be sure she was okay, not because he cared, but because he needed to clear his conscience to sleep. He needed to check that the fireplace hadn't smoked up, that she hadn't broken anything, that his problem was contained. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out into the biting night, the storm now a little calmer. He reached the carriage house door. He almost raised his hand to knock. Sudden unusual courtesy, but stopped. He was the property owner. He didn't need permission. He inserted his master key, turned the lock with a decisive click, and pushed the door open without preamble, stepping into the unexpected warmth. The immediate wave of heat and the smell of pine and clean wood smoke was a shock. The interior was cozy, lit by the flickering, hypnotic dance of the fire in the stone hearth, and Mary was there, standing by the small kitchen counter. She was no longer wearing the soaked, dirty jacket. She was wrapped haphazardly in one of his thick, monogrammed terry cloth robes, a sight that immediately caused a jarring physical tension in his chest. The robe was comically large on her slender frame, pulled tight at her waist. Her hair, still damp, cascaded down her back in dark waves, highlighting the sharpness of her collarbone. She looked fragile, beautiful, and utterly vulnerable. She gasped, spinning around, clutching the lapels of the robe together. Her face was flushed with shock and indignation. James's carefully constructed indifference shattered. He ignored her question, his eyes not even focusing on her, but on the small, cluttered surface of the counter. Lying there, next to a chipped ceramic coffee mug, were several official-looking documents pulled from a plastic protector sheet that was still damp from the snow. His gaze locked onto the document on top, the centerpiece of a small, fragile stack. It wasn't just a legal form. In the upper left corner, emblazoned clearly beneath a state seal, was a distinct, bold graphic, the emblem of the New York Fire Department's Arson and Investigation Unit. The color drained from James's face. He froze, the flashlight beam wavering in his hand. The reality of the girl with the dirty clothes, the fear, the nowhere, suddenly shifted, taking on a far more sinister and complex dimension. This wasn't simple homelessness or a broken heart. This was criminal. This was systemic. This was a tragedy shrouded in official paper. He had expected a lease agreement or a debt notice. He had not expected a document relating to a death investigation. James's voice was low, stripped of all previous impatience and sarcasm, replaced by an unnerving, authoritative chill. He took a single, slow step closer, the firelight catching the steely focus in his eyes. Mary darted forward, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, trying desperately to shield the papers with her body, but it was too late. He had already read the header, Estate of Evelyn Hayes, status, contested title transfer. James felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far more chilling than the blizzard outside. His carefully constructed life, insulated by wealth and order, was suddenly pierced by the chaos and desperation he had sought to avoid. He stood there, a silent, imposing figure, the beam of his flashlight still fixed on the papers Mary was now desperately trying to clutch to her chest. The emblem of the fire department's Arson and Investigation Unit felt like a brand, searing the scene into his consciousness. He repeated, his voice firm, but surprisingly devoid of the cutting edge it had held earlier. The sight of her, so utterly vulnerable in his oversized robe, clutching official documents relating to something so profoundly grim, disarmed him. Tears, which Mary had valiantly held back for days, finally spilled over. They tracked paths through the grime on her cheeks, catching the firelight like tiny diamonds. Her shoulders began to shake uncontrollably. She crumpled onto a nearby bar stool, burying her face in her hands, the papers still clutched tightly. It's my mother's, she choked out between sobs. Her apartment. James watched her, an uncomfortable tightness spreading in his chest. He was accustomed to calculated risks, to emotional detachment, to problems that could be solved with decisive action or a well-placed check. This, however, was raw, visceral pain, and it was deeply unsettling. He found himself, against his own nature, setting the flashlight down and taking another step closer, his eyes scanning the visible portions of the document. "Start from the beginning," he commanded, his tone now gentler, almost weary. "Every detail." Mary sniffed, slowly lifting her head. Her eyes, red and swollen, met his, and he saw not just fear, but a flicker of a desperate, pleading hope. "My mother, Evelyn, passed away 7 weeks ago," she began, her voice hoarse and trembling. Unexpectedly, James's brow furrowed. "A house fire." She shook her head emphatically. "That's what they tried to say. The fire department initially ruled it accidental, faulty wiring. But," she paused, taking a shaky breath, "my stepfather, Michael Brown, he's the one who was home when it happened. He was supposed to be watching her. He claimed he was asleep, that he woke up to smoke, but he got out unscathed." The pieces began to click into place. forming a picture far more sinister than simple homelessness. Mary nodded, her gaze dropping to the papers in her lap. Mikkel, my stepfather, he always hated that apartment. It was my mother's, inherited from her side of the family. She bought it outright before she met him. He always wanted to sell it, invest in some harebrained scheme of his. She took another deep, shuddering breath. After she died, he started saying it was hers, so it was now his. James asked, a sharp edge entering his voice. He had seen enough legal maneuvers to recognize a familiar pattern of exploitation. No, she wouldn't. We talked about everything. She had a simple will from 10 years ago, leaving everything to me. He wouldn't let me see it. He wouldn't let me talk to her lawyer. He told me he already had an updated version. James's jaw tightened. Yes, and he actually did it. He filed a police report last week. He said I cleared out her bank accounts. It's a lie. My mother trusted me with her finances. She had a severe heart condition, and I managed everything for her. He used that against me, twisting it. Now there's a travel restriction order, a warrant for my arrest if I try to leave the state. He threatened to put me in jail if I didn't sign the papers. He wanted to sell the apartment, take the money, and leave. I refused. Her voice cracked, dissolving into renewed sobs. I ran. I just ran. I was going to try and get to my aunt in Boston, but then the police called my phone, and I knew he wasn't bluffing. James felt a sudden, icy surge of fury, a feeling he rarely allowed himself outside the boardroom. This was more than an inconvenience. It was a profound injustice, a deliberate act of malice against someone utterly defenseless. He pictured Mary, so small and fragile, battling the elements, hunted by a man who should have protected her, all while mourning her mother. It resonated with a deep, personal memory. He thought he had buried a childhood friend whose family had been similarly exploited after a tragedy. He had felt helpless then. He was not helpless. Now, he walked over to the small kitchenette and found a box of tea bags. He selected a calming herbal blend and filled a kettle with water, putting it on the electric burner. The mundane act felt strangely grounding. Michael, James said, his back to her, the tea kettle slowly beginning to hiss. What's his full name? Mary looked up, startled by the shift in his demeanor, the subtle hardening of his posture. Mikhail Brown James probed, his mind already racing, connecting dots, formulating a strategy. You mentioned the arson unit. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible, but it was always weird. Michael was never careful. He smoked in bed, he left candles burning, and he talked about wanting to torch the place to get the insurance money if Mom ever got rid of him. He thought I never heard him, but I did. Just after Mom passed, I went back to the apartment to get some of her things, and I found this document hidden in a drawer. But Michael told me it was closed. James turned a steaming mug of tea in his hand and offered it to her. She took it with trembling fingers. Grateful for the warmth. He lied to you, James stated. Not as a question, but as a cold, hard fact. He's using the police report to intimidate you into signing away your inheritance, and he's suppressing information about your mother's death to do it. This isn't just about money, Mary. Mary stared into her tea, the gravity of his words settling over her. She whispered, a primal cry for help. James met her gaze, a decision solidifying in his analytical mind. The old James Smith would have called his lawyer, made an anonymous tip, and washed his hands of it. But the sight of Mary, the genuine anguish in her eyes, the sheer audacity of the injustice, stirred something deeper. This was not a business problem. This was a human one. And for the first time in a long time, James felt a powerful, undeniable need to intervene. You do nothing, he said, his voice firm, authoritative, laced with a newfound resolve that surprised even himself. You stay here. You eat. You sleep. You are safe. He pulled out his phone, a secure, encrypted device. My lawyer, Richard Davis, is one of the best in the state, specializes in complex estate litigation and white-collar crime. He's discreet, expensive, and ruthless. He'll know exactly how to untangle this mess. And I have connections in the city. Mary looked at him, disbelief and burgeoning hope warring on her face. But why? Why would you help me? James paused, considering the question. He didn't have a clear answer. He just knew he couldn't turn his back. Let's just say I have a low tolerance for bullies. Mary, especially bullies who prey on the vulnerable and exploit tragedy for profit. And you, he added, a flicker of something almost akin to warmth in his eyes, you deserve justice for your mother. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Get some rest. I'll send someone up with fresh clothes and food in the morning. And don't worry about Michael Brown. He won't be bothering you again. As James walked back through the newcomer snow to the main house, the blizzard no longer felt like an annoyance, but a challenge, a cover for the darkness that had descended on Mary's life. He felt a rare sense of purpose, a focus that went beyond profit margins. His phone was already pressed to his ear, Richard Davis's number on the display. Richard, he began, his voice crisp and clear. I have a situation for you. A young woman, orphaned, being blackmailed and swindled out of her inheritance by her stepfather, and it involves a suspicious fire and a stalled arson investigation. The details flowed from him, precise and analytical, honed by years of legal maneuvering. He painted a grim but accurate picture, his anger giving way to a cold, strategic calculation. He knew how to fight. He knew how to win. And for some reason he couldn't quite articulate, he wanted to win this one for Mary. The first few days were a blur of intense activity for James. He connected Mary with Richard via secure video calls, ensuring she felt heard and understood, patiently listening to her story again as Richard meticulously took notes. He arranged for a discreet, highly reputable private investigator to look into Michael Brown's background and financial dealings, particularly anything related to insurance policies or debts. He also leveraged his considerable network in municipal government to make inquiries about the stalled fire department investigation into Evelyn Hayes' apartment fire, carefully sidestepping any official interference, merely seeking clarification on procedural delays. Mary, meanwhile, remained in the carriage house, a fragile bloom beginning to unfurl in the warmth and safety. She ate regularly, the fear slowly receding from her eyes. James had instructed his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to discreetly bring her meals, fresh clothes, and anything she needed without prying. He only saw Mary briefly, usually through a video conference call, maintaining a professional distance. Yet each time he saw her, a new layer of her personality seemed to emerge, a quiet resilience, a surprising wit, a deep gratitude that humbled him in a way his business successes never had. One afternoon, a little over a week after Mary's arrival, James received a call from Richard. The news was grim. James, Richard's voice, crackled through the phone. Michael Brown is not just a petty blackmailer. The private investigator found substantial evidence of massive gambling debts, loan shark connections, and a history of insurance fraud. He's desperate. James's blood ran cold. We can't prove it yet, Richard cautioned. But the motive is blindingly clear, and the fire department investigation's office looked into it. The original lead investigator, Captain Miller, was about to flag it as suspicious. He suspected arson, but he was abruptly reassigned to a different district a month ago, and the case was passed to a rookie. James felt a sickening clench in his gut. This wasn't just about an apartment anymore. It was about cold-blooded murder, covered up by bureaucratic maneuvering. He realized the depths of the danger Mary was truly in. Michael Brown would stop at nothing. We need to accelerate this, James said, his voice hard as steel. Get an emergency injunction to freeze the apartment's title transfer, effective immediately, and get a restraining order against Brown for Mary. Use the police report he filed against her as leverage. Show them what a transparent attempt at blackmail it is. Richard assured him he was already on it. But even as James hung up, a profound sense of unease settled over him. Michael Brown was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. He wouldn't give up easily. He knew Mary was vulnerable. He had to protect her